You give the information that you have available at the front end to let them make as informed of a decision as possible about who you are, about what you do, about why you're doing it, and what they can reasonably expect to see. That is very similar to what you're describing about what Pre-Chiro is offering. Because everybody in my incoming class that I told you about just now, none of us had any idea what we were getting into. I think that that's probably true across the board, that there just isn't that clarity from the beginning about this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, this is about how long it's going to take, and these are some things that you should know on the front end. If that conversation was had on day one, day two, I think it would significantly help to reframe for students, what to expect and what they need to prepare for.
Hey, what's going on? Dr. Ben here with my friend Dan, fellow Chiro. You're watching the Pre Chiro podcast, where we aim to demystify chiropractic and illustrate this really beautiful pathway that has so many different turns in it and so many different ways that you can navigate the terrain. So today we're speaking with Dan. He has tons of insight to share with you. And Dan, for the audience, pre-Chiro students, prospective students, people who are not yet in chiropractic school, how can you introduce yourself to them and also just welcome them to this path?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Glad to be here. My name is Dr. Daniel Mutter. I am currently in practice in Portland, Oregon, with if anybody's following the news right now, it's currently, and there is some serious stuff happening in this part of the country. And that's sort of the backdrop of the environment that everybody's in, but particularly in the city that I have my practice. I've been in practice for about 7 years at this point. So I've been in an associateship, I've done my own thing, worked as an independent contractor, and I suspect that might be part of what we're going to get into as far as the journey to today. I did start my educational process. In undergrad, I studied classical philosophy, so I didn't come to chiropractic from a kind of medical perspective or a biology major or somebody who maybe thought they were going to go to medical school or something like that. It was much more abstract than that. And yeah, I really think that's helped to inform what I do and why I do it. And I do think that philosophy is one of the three pillars of what chiropractic is and what it represents and what it can be.
Absolutely. I've had conversations with you in the past where you talk about philosophy with a capital P and philosophy with a lowercase p.
Yeah.
Can you get into chiropractic as a philosophy and then chiropractic philosophy? How would you describe chiropractic philosophy to someone who's really, just getting tapped into chiropractic?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that chiropractic rests on three pillars. And one of them is philosophy, which is kind of the orientation for where you're coming from, why you're doing what you're doing, kind of the bigger picture. And that is informed by and helps to inform the science, so the study of the body and health, anatomy and physiology, how energy gets expressed through matter. And then the third pillar is the art. So how do you deliver and practice both the science and the philosophy in conjunction with each other? As far as capital P, lowercase p, I think that was really just more of a distinction between looking at philosophy as a discipline, so something that is in an academic circle, like looking at the love of knowledge or the love of wisdom, and anything from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle on the Western side from the beginning to some of the more Eastern perspectives through Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, because every culture has their own philosophy that helps people make sense of the world around them, kind of gives them a story. We've certainly inherited a more Greco-Roman direction, at least in the way that our classical institutions have been set up for formal learning. And what I mean by that is like looking at that influence of Greece and Rome in how we have educated our students. And that's been really helpful in one respect, but it's also been very limiting and narrowing in another one. So chiropractic philosophy to me is really helping people to connect with the big idea. And so that is certainly one of the fundamental tenets of chiropractic philosophy, which is, there is an innate intelligence in, I believe, all living things. And the way that that gets expressed through the form of the body can either be done with efficiency and fluidity and clarity, or there can be interference to that process. And in chiropractic, we call that interference a subluxation, especially if we're talking about it in relationship to the spine. And for me, the way that I practice, I have a bit of a broader relationship to subluxation than some of the really kind of hardline upper cervical dudes and women, thinking that subluxation is only at C1, C2. I do think that from a more broad philosophical point of view, the subluxation represents dis-ease in the body. It's the manifestation of interference in the physical form. So it's taking this abstract idea of energy or intelligence and looking at how it connects into and organizes and coordinates biological life. And in chiropractic, one of the main kind of connections and leaps forward that I think DD started and BJ expanded upon was drawing that bridge between saying there is this vitalistic element, so this idea that there is this animating force, and then what DD did was say not only does it influence the body, but this is how. And the this is how is something that's been written into chiropractic from the beginning. And that's why we talk about the nervous system and the spine. And everything beyond that, I think, is a reflection of those two aspects of the person and of the body. So what is happening with the tone of the central nervous system and its tissues? So both the brain, the spinal cord, the fascial coverings that connect them, so the meninges, the ways that those anchor into the osseous part of the body, the skeletal system, and then how the shape, position, tone, and tension of that system in the deepest layer of the person gets reflected out to the other tissues. When there is something like interference in that system, it can be mechanical, it can be mental emotional, because that's bidirectional. If something is going on in the mind and the emotional body, it will show up in the way that the physical body is presenting. It's the way that people communicate, both to other people and within their own experience. And then the environmental aspect of, what you breathe, what you eat, what you drink, who you talk to, the things that you consume in the big picture are all things that have to be mediated through your senses, through the nervous system, and your ability to adapt and respond or react and shut down. And I think all of that is tied really intricately to what we look at as chiropractors. And so this relationship of the energy and the intelligence and the expression of it through the form is why we look at the spine. The different ways that we look at the spine represent what our philosophical understandings and biases are. But notice at no point in time so far have I talked about pain, because it's not that pain isn't important. Pain is essential. It's an essential driver for change in individuals and in the system as a whole. I think collectively we're experiencing some significant discomfort right now, and that's showing up in people's bodies and vice versa. But it's really about function. It's really about the expression of the life principle through the individual is I think ultimately what chiropractic is looking at and the way that chiropractic can help advance the human condition, because that's fundamentally what its original objective is, what I still think it is, and what I hope it will become.
You just basically gave us a bird's eye view on chiropractic philosophy and how chiropractic emerged from these basic premises and how it's evolved to be understood by practicing chiropractors. And if you could express a little bit on how chiropractic philosophy shows up on a day-to-day level in your own practice, can you describe sort of the application of this philosophy through the practice that you've developed and grown?
Absolutely. It's the first two things to come to mind for me are, one, communication with practice members. So what are you talking about with them? Like, what are the conversations that you're having in the practice about what their experience is and what it is you are actually doing as a chiropractor with however you decide to practice. It can look 100 different ways. If the principle is sound, then you're practicing chiropractic as far as I'm concerned. So what that looks like for me is having conversations with people about their bodies. I talk about the form and the anatomy and the physiology and why these things are showing up for them in the ways that they are based on the clinical interpretation that I'm seeing with the things that I look at, what they're describing to me, how they're describing it, and really offering a perspective to people that kind of stretches the boundaries a little bit with maybe how they've been feeling what they've been feeling. So at no point in time is it about telling somebody that they're wrong or they shouldn't be feeling this or that, you know, this doesn't make any sense, because they're the expert of their own body. And it's really your job, again, in my opinion, to help them get a deeper understanding about how their own body works and ways that they can continue to support and expand and enhance that relationship. And that that looks and sounds like function. It looks and sounds like movement. It looks and sounds like this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is how it relates to your nervous system. I do talk about the spine, but I don't talk about it mechanically all of the time. It really also depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to an engineer, it's going to be different language, different metaphors, and different verbiage than somebody who's a poet. So having that kind of fluency with understanding what you're doing and where you're coming from is really important. The other way that it shows up, the first way would be communication with people. The other way that it shows up for me is just really being as clear as possible with why I'm there. Why am I showing up? Where am I coming from on this particular day? And ultimately, it has to be coming from a place of service, because that is the essence of what you are offering to people. If you're coming at it from kind of a restorative, mechanistic point of view, like this person has a problem and I need to fix it, or this person is broken, or this person has a diagnosis that needs treatment, I'm not saying that those things are incorrect or wrong. I'm saying they are inherently narrow-minded. And I think that chiropractic offers something that includes that, but goes well beyond it. And if it doesn't, then that's a limiting perspective and a limiting belief. And ultimately, it's going to affect the type of results that you get with the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
One is communication with other people, the people that you see in your practice. And two, it's how are you showing up at the beginning of each day, framing why you're there and what you are hoping to offer. So having clarity in your own system, so that you can help facilitate and offer that to other people.
Yeah, honing in on that clarity in your own system. As chiropractors, the study of the philosophy often requires that we turn inward and we begin to reflect on our own belief systems, as systems that are, the belief system can be thought of as a different system, similar to the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. I've heard that before. Can you describe a little bit about the internal process of getting to where you've been at, where you're at right now, like how you approached the philosophy and how you started to engage with it and be in relationship to it throughout your chiropractic sort of process of becoming a chiropractor? And
Yeah. A little bit of background on that. My mom is a chiropractor. So for me, growing up, from the time I was in utero to the time that I started practice, that was a significant influence in how I came to see things, especially as they related to health in the body and um, just the idea of of wellness and what to do when you're sick and how to think about physical, mental challenges with the body. Again, that it's not necessarily reflecting something that's broken that needs to be fixed. It's there is a communication issue somewhere in the system. And if you can support that and you trust that the body has this innate ability to heal and to reboot, then the ways that you're going to offer that service and the support are going to look different than dumping drugs, opening people up for surgical reasons. And there are times and places when that's really important and necessary and helpful, but it's absolutely not the first step. Because once you introduce those things, you can't undo it.
Mhm.
So for me, I it just that was just the background for me. That's what I thought normal was, and it really wasn't until I was in college that I kind of had this understanding that other people don't actually think this way. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until that point that I kind of started to connect the dots that the reason that I think the way that I do is because of the way that I was raised. And I was raised in a chiropractic household in the sense that my mom lives and practices and really embodies those principles. And that's something that I just, you know, was gifted from the time I was born. And that's been incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful for me. And then beyond that, my kind of mental understanding of trying to figure all of that out is part of the reason why I think I was and still am really interested in philosophy, and particularly in the intersection of where philosophy meets physiology, like where the abstract can be manifested into the form. And
Mhm.
one of the reasons why I think chiropractic is so powerful is because I don't really know other disciplines that do that as explicitly as chiropractic does.
Right, right. Taking that Eastern chi or ki or prana and connecting it to the Western science of proprioception and
Yeah.
salutogenesis and allostatic loading and understanding adverse mechanical cord tension in the system. So, can you speak a little bit to this intersection at this point that we're at as having all this new science having emerged in the last 50 years? And then also having these age-old principles that we still embrace because they never have been really disproven or have never failed. Can you speak a little bit about, as a chiropractic student, how you can maybe balance the studies and where you should be looking maybe to start to explore these intersections?
Yeah. On that note, particularly from the student point of view, an insight that I received like at the very end of chiropractic school. So like I'm about to graduate, and probably one of the most important things that I learned about the process of the education of going to school and some of the major frustrations and issues and challenges that I felt personally and that my friends and classmates had also expressed um, about just the process. And it's like there's so much about what this curriculum is really demanding of you that it's not really clear how it's chiropractic or why it's chiropractic. And I do think that the school that I went to, which is Life West, did as good of a job as they could considering the restraints and the constrictions of the system that they're in, which is regulated by the board and by all manner of other things. And there are other people that are more well versed in just the politics of that than I am. But the insight that I got was the role of chiropractic college is not to make you a good chiropractor. It's to give you the opportunity to pass the examinations that you need to pass in order to get your license. Like, that is their primary goal. And that's why the curriculum is structured in the way that it is. Because if you don't have a license, you don't get to practice. I mean, it's that simple. And so their main task and their main charge at that point is, how do we prepare students for the tests that we know they will need to get through? Once I realized that, it took so much of the charge out about what my frustration was, because that nobody ever explained that to me, and I don't know that they even know that. They might now. But the expectation that I had from day one going in is, I'm in chiropractic school, I'm going to learn how to be a chiropractor. That's part of it, but that wasn't the primary objective of the curriculum and of the educational process. In an ideal world, I think that it should be. I think that would be phenomenal. And I look forward to a time when that balance starts to shift about what the primary question is. At the end of the day, right now, as a healthcare provider who is licensed by the individual states, going through those hoops to pass your board exams and everything else is still required. Part of the reason why it's required is because it's in the interest of public safety that people delivering healthcare services are trained and educated. That's a really important thing to acknowledge too. That's one piece of the puzzle. It's not the only thing, and that's not the reason why people get called to go to chiropractic school. They're not like, hey, I want to learn how to sit down and take tests. Like, no, you've been inspired. Hopefully, you've been inspired in some way to want to help other people and to use your hands and to use your heart and to use your brain to do that. And chiropractic is a beautiful vehicle for that. But right now, I think it's still the case that the chiropractic curriculum, even in the philosophically strong schools, are still playing by the same rules as everybody else. And they can help to offset that with teaching technique and having philosophy talks and having philosophy classes, bringing speakers in and really helping to frame and offer resources to the students in that way. But my experience was such that that wasn't the primary goal. So as far as what a student can do to look at these things, is the most helpful thing for me going through the academic part was study your anatomy. Like, just that simple. You can literally never study enough about how the body works. And not just the anatomy, because I'm not talking about, these are the memorizations of the structures that you need to be able to stick a pin into. I'm talking about knowing what those structures are, what they do, how they relate to each other, the relationship that they have to the region, the organ systems, the rest of the body. And this is not like a rote memorization like, oh, this spinal nerve has this dermatome and myotome. That's really important to know. You should know that stuff. It goes back to that philosophical question of, why is this important? Why do you need to know this? It's because it gives you insight into what is showing up in the people that come into your practice. And all of the things that are taught in chiropractic school, I do believe, are important and will come up at some point. A lot of the resistance about, like, this is medical diagnosis and we don't need to know this. If you pay attention and you're in practice for long enough, people will show up with all of the things that are covered in curriculum. So there's a reason why it's taught, and it's not just about passing a test. It's about at the very least, you should have heard about this before.
Mm-hmm.
Is it your job to manage it and treat it and diagnose it? Not necessarily, but you at least have to be familiar enough with the expressions of disease to know what it is and what it is you can do about it and what it is that's important for you to be able to co-manage that with another provider. There are times and places when that's appropriate, and it's your responsibility as a healthcare practitioner to know how to work with other people. So I would say study the anatomy, study the physiology. And as far as the context and the perspective of that, it really is what you resonate with. Like some people are going to read the Tao Te Ching and say, this is exactly what makes sense to me. Some people are going to read Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism and be like, yeah, this guy knows what's up. It spans generations, it spans cultures, because I think ultimately all of the sages and all of the people who have passed down their insights through these different cultures and periods of time are all talking about the same thing. It's how do we come to better understand ourselves, and therefore how do we come to relate better to each other, more humanely, more compassionately. Um, and part of that is psychological, and part of that is energetic, and part of that is how well can you connect to your heart? How well you create that balance between the mind, the heart, and the gut. All of those things have direct physiological correlates when you're also studying the anatomy. So how does this stuff all fit together? It's a beautiful and elaborate and extraordinarily complex puzzle that you will never finish trying to solve. And that's part of the amazing thing about being in practice and about being a chiropractor, is because it is a constant opportunity to learn and to grow. And as you learn and grow, you become more effective at helping other people to learn to grow as well.
So, as a philosopher, questions are so important. The quality of your question determines the quality of your life. I've heard that said. Can you speak on some of the questions that guided you to study the specific forms of chiropractic expression? Speak to reorganizational healing, speak to network spinal, speak to just the path, the specific unique path that you've been attracted to and the questions that maybe led you there?
Part of the framing of the questions for me is based on what my experience has been. So having gone to a lot of different kinds of chiropractors out of curiosity, out of having friends and colleagues who practice in different ways, especially when I was in school, that you, at least at Life West, where there was a concerted effort to have a very broad range of exploration for what the art of chiropractic looks like and can be, kind of opened my eyes to be like, there's how many different techniques, and people are using instruments, and people are using all kinds of applications and analyses and approaches. It's like chiropractic doesn't look one way. Coming from where I came from with the type of chiropractic that my mom practiced and what I had experienced growing up, and the felt sense that I had in my own body and in my own system about how I responded to adjustments, how I responded to different applications, and then going through school and being exposed to a lot of different ways that was done, it kind of helped narrow the field for me a little bit as far as what it felt like in my body to receive care that looked like this. And that's not to say that the other forms were not effective or not good. I think about it as different strokes for different folks. Like everybody is going to dance to a different kind of music. And so when you find the thing that you can groove to, that's the thing that just intuitively you want to pay attention to and you want to study and you want to delve deeper in.
Yep.
There are some chiropractic techniques that I acknowledge are really cool, fundamentally sound, help people out. That's just not the way that I'm called to practice. And that's not a judgment against them. That's just the skills that I have, the perspective that I hold, the way that I can best serve other people looks a certain way. And that is constantly evolving and changing. But I think it's a really personal question. It's, everything that you've ever experienced up until the point that you start to study. And as you continue to study is going to evolve and form that even further. But I guess the short answer to your question is it feels most congruent with who I am and how I relate to energy and information to be able to provide that service in that way.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter agrees with me on that, so she knows what's.
She knows what's up. She knows you. Well, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I believe that any prospective student that sat through these different perspectives and points of view that you shared and really internalized some of that truth from you would come away with a deeper sense of this path being more than what they thought it was, and there being such a greater exploration to be had than, do I want to go to medical school, or do I want to go to chiropractic school? Do I want to go to physical therapy school? Well, if you want to give chiropractic a true outlook and really go and look at what it is, then you're going to have to spend some time with it, because it's not something that you can just experience in one moment. Unless that one moment changed your life on the table and you're just wanting to share that with others in the way that it changed your life, you want to be able to provide that for others. Besides that, it sounds to me like you've really reflected on your entire life as being the path to becoming the chiropractor that you are today. It didn't start in chiropractic school for you.
No, not at all. And I was actually surprised on day one in my class. There were 13 people, and we all introduced ourselves to each other and kind of, talked about why we were there, like where we came from and what encouraged us to come to chiropractic school. And I remember hearing at least one, I think more than one of the people saying they had never actually been to a chiropractor before. And it made absolutely no sense to me. I was like, then why, how do you even know what you're getting into? And, over the course of years spending time with these folks and, learning more about their stories, and they stuck with it and started to develop that sense. It's like, it's never too late to start to study chiropractic or to find the value in chiropractic. For me, I mean, I had just had a different life experience. Like from the time that I was conceived, I was already in the field in that way, just because of where I was and who my parents were. And I'm extraordinarily grateful for that. And that absolutely did influence my perspective. I didn't actually think I was going to be a chiropractor until halfway through chiropractic school. So I had a lot of resistance, and part of it was because of the curriculum and just a lot of different things. But once I got to that point where I kind of had that clarity, it was just straight through at that point. So people come to it at different times, and sometimes it's one adjustment, and sometimes it's an entire lifetime of experience. But everybody has their own story, and I'm grateful to you for giving me an opportunity to share part of mine. I do think it's really powerful, and it's really necessary to be able to offer chiropractic in the way that expands human consciousness, because I really think that's what it ultimately is offering. And the very limiting conversation about, is it good for back pain? Is it effective for headaches? Does it help treat asthma? Those are not the highest quality questions that you can ask. And as you mentioned before, the quality of the questions that you're asking will help shape the types of answers that you get. So if you ask inherently limiting and myopic questions, you're going to get inherently small and not very complicated answers.
What do you think about this question of how could chiropractic be different with the addition of pre-chiro, with this new extended process, really illustrating the stages that a prospective student can go through to become more convicted in this decision, more clear on what they're getting themselves into? How could that change the experience that chiropractors have, that the profession has? Could it change the coherence and resonance within the profession with with the addition of pre-Chiro? What comes to mind for you?
Well, those are a few different questions. So can it change the coherence and the experience? I would say absolutely yes. The first thing that comes to mind for me is kind of a reflection of just fundamental practice management. And it's on the first visit when somebody comes in to schedule an appointment with you for whatever reason they decide, you have a conversation with them. And it's really important to figure out, why are they here? What are their expectations? What are they looking for? It's not just about the OPQRST, going through their history to document what the chief complaint is. You have to do that too, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture. And so getting clarity about what they're looking for and where they are in their life at that particular point of view helps inform you what you need to do in that session and what you need to do moving forward. And so the relationship of what you're describing with pre-Chiro is, on my first visit with people, I literally say, welcome to the office. How'd you find me? Why are you here? And I'm going to briefly describe to you what the order of events for today's visit is going to be. So I outline from the very beginning what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, how long it's going to take. And that will, at least from the very beginning, set them up to know, okay, this is what I'm in for today. Then we have visit to report of findings. This is what we found. This is what I'm seeing is going on. This is what I think I can help you out with. This is what I want to do about it. You give the information that you have available at the front end to let them make as informed of a decision as possible about who you are, about what you do, about why you're doing it, and what they can reasonably expect to see. That is very similar to what you're describing about what Pre-Chiro is offering, because everybody in my incoming class that I told you about just now, none of us had any idea what we were getting into. I think that that's probably true across the board, that there just isn't that clarity from the beginning about, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, this is about how long it's going to take, and these are some things that you should know on the front end. If that conversation was had on day one, day two, I think it would significantly help to reframe for students, what to expect and what they need to prepare for. And that is one of the main functions that it sounds like to me Pre-Chiro is looking to do, when the need that it's looking to fill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing just that parallel between when somebody comes into your office, you want to get to know them, you want to understand their needs, what their desires are, what challenges they're going through, and get to know them. And I think that the pre-Chiro process is saying, okay, if there's 5 stages of pre-Chiro and the 5th stage is the admissions process, well, then there's 4 stages that we're missing out on to better understand the people that might be interested in coming to our school, so that we can get to know who they are, what they're looking for, and we can better serve their needs. I think that every school would function better knowing who these people truly are, as opposed to basing the decision on whether they can be admitted or not on an application, one essay, and a couple of letters of recommendation, which is a character reference.
So I think that goes both ways, because if one of the main metrics that the school is looking at is, what are graduation rates, what are test scores, the ability for a scholastic test to accurately measure competency, I think, has serious challenges in the first place. But looking at it from the end backwards or from the beginning forwards, I think that's what it sounds like to me Pre-Chiro is looking at, is how do you help people who either want to be, could be, or don't even know what chiropractic is, be introduced to the possibility on the front end. And by doing it that way, it really puts the onus on the school to say, these are the people that we are attracting. So what do we have to do, and how do we have to change to support those needs and those people while still being in line with what our philosophy is, what our principles are, and what we need to do to prepare students on the other side when they get out for the exams and otherwise. But it's like, I think it goes both ways. It's not like there isn't this process of assimilation. It's like before you go to chiropractic school, you're just this civilian, and then you come in, and over the period of 3 or 4 years, you become a chiropractor and everything changes. It's like, no, everybody that comes in brings their own skills, their own stories, their own backgrounds, and those things help to influence how they're going to practice on the way out, the opportunities that they're going to have while they're there, the types of people that they're going to be able to connect and communicate with. And so I do think that is one of the functions of the schools that's currently lacking. And I think a big point of evidence for this is looking simply at just the demographic data for who is in chiropractic school right now.
Quantitative measures are delivered through different things in society today and different models within the context of education. It's been shown, I believe, when I was looking at what the CCE bases a college's success on, or the accreditation process that a college has to go through in verifying that they're providing a quality chiropractic curriculum. They have to show that the quantitative measures that they have are fulfilling their school's mission. So how can we move in the direction of quantitative measures fulfilling a vitalistic school's mission so that they can retain accreditation and still serve the budding chiropractic student?
That's a high quality question. So I really appreciate that. Certainly something I would want to spend some more time on digesting. But as far as initial things that come to mind, one is if you simply use quantitative measurements as the way to determine whether something is successful, you're missing at least half, probably more than half of the picture. And again, in relationship to how that might look in a clinical way, because I am a practicing chiropractor, I am a clinician, I work with people all the time. And what I talk to them about, especially with something as simple as range of motion, which is a really important thing to know. You can look at them and say, how far can you turn your head? You can either use an algometer, you can use an inclinometer, you can do any number of visual assessments to gauge how many degrees compared to normal orthopedic value do they have. That's a really important piece of information to know. If you judged the success or failure of your ability to deliver chiropractic care based solely on one thing, and that thing is only a quantitative measurement, you're not looking at the wealth of data that's arguably more important than that, which is qualitative. So it's not just how much can they move, it's how well do they move. That's a qualitative question. In the same way that having a qualitative assessment of the experience of people in the curriculum, the ability for them to communicate, the ability for them to demonstrate and document what they know and how they know it, because not everybody is going to primarily have written test taking skills as their strength. And so if that's the only avenue that you're judging people on to determine whether they're capable of delivering excellent chiropractic care, I mean, that's extraordinarily restricting, and I don't think it honors the diversity of learning styles and competencies that people have. Having a conversation with somebody is really important. Being able to, the biggest issue with that is it's going to take more time, it's going to take more money, and it requires people to care more than just looking at a black and white number on a test. So I don't have the answer to your question. You know, how do we make quantitative measurements more reflective of assessing students' success or failure in school? I think it's a piece. I'm not saying throw it out, it's not important. I'm saying put it into context. Right now, it's the only thing. It should be a piece, and probably not even the strongest one, in my opinion, because there are people who are extraordinary chiropractors, and based on the classical assessment from a schooling point of view, maybe they weren't great students. Not because they aren't good students, but because the way that they were being asked to study and to demonstrate competency in the curriculum didn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a straight line to say you didn't do well on your board exams, therefore you're not a good chiropractor. That's complete bullshit.
Yep.
So it is important. You do have to be able to pass tests. And that shouldn't be the be all and end all of your training to get out and serve the public and to do your work.
Thank you for sharing. I hope that some students were able to really grasp some of this, and that this is just the tip of the iceberg for them, that they really take this and they go deep internally, but also go deep into their studies. Are there any, like, right off the top of your head, sort of great texts, any great resources that you recommend students go and check out?
Off the top of my head, B.J. Palmer, volume 32 of the Green Books, The Science, Art, and Philosophy of Chiropractic. It is very short, it is very accessible. It may seem a little bit strange to some people without more of a context, but that will give you a really good introduction to who he is and where he's coming from, and kind of some of the historical perspective about where chiropractic was in the 50s. Next would be, I love anatomy trains. So Tom Myers, from that studying anatomy and physiology perspective, looking at the fascial relationships of how the body is connected, super powerful. Get yourself a copy of Gray's Anatomy, or even just an atlas of Gray's Anatomy, and just look at the pictures. If you don't even study them, if you can't pronounce the words, you'll get to that point, but just familiarize yourself with what the body looks like in its layers. And I would say, right now, something that I'm currently reading that's been extraordinarily eye-opening for me is a book called Evolution's End by Joseph Chilton Pierce. And that is kind of looking, in my opinion, it's a chiropractic book. He's not a chiropractor. He doesn't talk about chiropractic, but the expression of intelligence through form is what he's talking about. He references the triune brain, so the evolutionary layers of how our central nervous system is set up, what that looks like in terms of our expression in an autonomic response reaction perspective, psychological considerations, how that relates to the growing nervous system of a child. Covers a lot of ground, weaves in Shaiva Tantrism and, neuroscience. It's really interesting. But that sort of thing, where there's that weaving of the science and the philosophy, I think is really powerful. So that would be, off the top of my head, a very, very, very short list.
I know you're an avid reader. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us, Dan. I think that this was very eye-opening. I love the substance in what you're talking about is the essence of chiropractic, and we're just trying to keep it focused. Students will feel more supported if they hear this message and listen to it a couple times. There was so much in this discussion, but we really want you to sit with this stuff. This is really us trying to be here for you so that you can make an informed decision on your path. And thank you for taking the time with us today.
Thank you. I've got one more suggestion for students or prospective students. If you know a chiropractor that you like, or if you even just are looking online and you read somebody's website and it resonates with you and you're like, this person is speaking about things or offering a perspective that I want more information about, send them an email, call their office, just reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in chiropractic. I'm potentially going to chiropractic school. Can I chat with you on the phone? Like, in my experience, chiropractors who want to give, love, and serve out of abundance are more than happy to support prospective chiropractors, students, and anybody on the path because they know what the path has been for them. And so that support is there. It's going to be really hard for them, especially if they're in practice, especially if they have their own families, to go out and do that kind of outreach. But anytime I receive an email or a phone call and somebody is interested, I will absolutely make the time to connect with them because it's that important. And I don't think I'm the only one that shares that. So reach out to people who are speaking in a way that you connect with and get more information in that way.
Take that message to heart. Go out there and meet some chiropractors. Get educated, get informed, expand your context. So
Yes.
much more to it than you think.